start recording here. Cool. So yeah, I have some material to go through, but I'm going to leave a lot of time for any questions you guys might have with assignment 6 in. This is definitely the home stretch. So all that's left is working on the final project. And in terms of the material, like it's mainly just about sort of things that I think are worthwhile to focus on in terms of sort of getting more advanced with data visualization. So any other questions before I get started? Cool. So let me just get started here. So in terms of thinking about what's next, I've mentioned this as a theme across this course that I like to think of data visualization as really the intersection between data science and web development. And I thought sort of worthwhile to mention that based on kind of what I've just what's out there in the sort of data science world. I found it's currently underrated, and it's something where a lot of the tasks, a lot of the things that you're learning in this class, it may be rolled up into a data scientist or data engineer sort of position, or perhaps being sort of rolled up into a sort of business analyst, like more geared towards kind of working alongside an engineering team, and really sort of looking at things from that perspective. But given that there are a few companies that like I think it's trending to be more valued. You have some organizations. Capital One is an example here. They were one of the first companies to actually hire a VP of data visualization. And IBM, they sort of divide their data science practices into complementary skills, data visualization being sort of one of them, along with kind of more engineering focused, more stats focused, kind of breaking apart the whole sort of cluster of skills that are normally grouped together in data science. And I think this trend is only going to continue. Like as I was just sort of I feel like in the past couple of months, like I've become aware of like some other companies that are sort of moving into this like data visualization practice, and I think things like that, it's only going to continue. And in terms of the kind of we were touching on web development, but obviously we don't want we're not sort of the end goal of this course isn't to make you guys web developers. So to continue, in terms of like, if you want to pursue more web development skills, or you find that that's useful in your career, we've touched on Flask, but there's a lot more there. On the Python side, there's also Django, which is another library that those are the two main web development libraries in Python. And React is a JavaScript library. It's what it's created by Facebook. It's really it's actually what Plotly's Dash is based off of, and it's geared towards really like making web development more modular. It's very similar to the sort of experience that you would get with something like Dash, like that kind of philosophy of making things more modular and sort of dealing with callbacks, receiving data, rendering elements based on that. On the data visualization side, you have a few. I just wanted to include, a few other libraries that are worth checking out. There's a whole lot more. There's a pretty wide range of libraries out there, and really, I highlighted kind of the two. What I've found are sort of the logical next steps for kind of continuing education in this if you've been using D3 and that's something that you would like to continue. Crossfilter is a library that I've mentioned before. It's sort of geared towards adding the like data frame style data operations into JavaScript. So this is just the main Crossfilter page here. It's created by Square, and basically, you'll see a lot of examples like this where you're able to kind of use graphs as selectors. Really kind of that's at Dash we refer to cross filtering as being able to use one graph as an input to paint another graph, and so here you have just a few examples that are usually highlighted around something like that. But Crossfilter is meant to bring all of this into the JavaScript side. So really making it accessible to more traditional web developers. People who may not may not have the skills in Python or R to kind of do the data manipulation on that side. And then lastly, kind of bringing together Crossfilter and D3. This is a library called DCJS, and this is really just kind of combining those two those two libraries. And there's, as I mentioned, there's a lot of other packages out there. We sort of like D3 is really the kind of elephant in the room in terms of libraries like that. But I've mentioned like there's quite a few others. There's libraries like Plotly, Vega, Vue.js, which is sort of coming out of Uber. So they're more or Vue.gl. I'm sorry. Vue.gl is really focused on kind of using WebGL rendering. So that's sort of another approach to dealing with large data sets where, with D3, you have limits in terms of what SVG can do. And with WebGL, you're using your computer's graphics processor. Although, as I'll mention below, there's sort of a few, there's still things that you need to consider when you are working with larger data sets. It's not just simply a matter of throwing huge amounts of data into a library and trying to find a common way to plot those. And then to take a step, and actually before I move on, in terms of just other packages out there, from everyone's work on the final project so far, has anyone else come across any libraries that they're using that they would like to share with the class? I realized I also didn't mention any of the mapping packages, but you do have libraries like Leaflet, Mapbox, Carto, things like that.
I'm using Mapbox, and that seems to be powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mapbox is a really good Mapbox is really good, like especially with using like in my experience, I found points work really well with that style of tiled map. Although I've seen a lot of examples where they also have choropleths being there, so it's yeah, and I see other people also have experience with Mapbox. And that's definitely a good library. And feel free to put any more libraries that you guys are using in the chat, and you can share it there. And then just taking a step back in terms of in terms of thinking of data visualization, this is just sort of one thing to think of as you're working on data visualization projects. And the way that I'm kind of framing this is you have static, static projects. And I'm sort of thinking of, either, not just sort of a single graph, but, sort of more either apps, possibly reports, things like that. And, you sort of need to think of like, what is the context of the of what you're building. And the way that I'm sort of framing this is either static or iterative. And what I mean by iterative is, like a static report, if, there's sort of if this is a one-time project that you're working on, and, you sort of want it to look, you want it to have a certain look, the data is not going to change. That's the static aspect of it. And, with something like that, you could really get a polished user experience. So, the thing I always think of with this class of projects is infographics, where, somewhat they're, pretty expertly styled a lot of times, and you have your, the data is not updating. The infographic is meant to be relatively static. And because of that, you're able to take a lot of liberties with the design, really match the design to what you would like to show. And we kind of ran into this as well. If we think of assignment one, where part of what we were looking at was dealing with outliers in a graph. And something like that, it's possible. You can sort of develop algorithms to deal with outliers. Lots of people were using things like log scales, that's a great automatic way of dealing with outliers. But a lot of times, sometimes you have a certain type of data, certain shape to your data set, and you just want to kind of label your outliers. So things like that. It's a more manual process, but it adds to a more polished experience. And then the flip side of that is something that's iterative. So it's either something that in which the data is continuously going to be updated, or you could even apply this to projects where you more interactive apps, where you have kind of a template, you're allowing users to make selections, and the data underlying it is changing. And for things like this, you need to find sort of alternative ways to style things. So you have slightly less freedom in terms of what you're able to do, because it needs to either fit all iterations. It needs to be something that you want to create your app and let it update over the months without having without having to kind of fine tune the design each time. You want it to be an automatic thing. So in terms of projects like this, and for your final projects, like obviously your final projects, it's by definition a one-time thing, but it's helpful that, like, if you are thinking of your final project as something that can be iterative, that's definitely something to think about as you're working on your final projects. And then, like I sort of mentioned this briefly with big data when I was talking about kind of WebGL based visualization packages, that the context here again matters. You know, when we were working in assignment 2 with big data, or at least with larger data sets, we had multiple ways of dealing with data, you know, being data shader or, you know, sort of doing more manual aggregation exercises. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just getting a phone call, so I'm going to pause this and I need to shut off the ringer. Okay, good. Okay, my screen should be back now. Can everyone hear me? And the ringing should have stopped. Sorry about that. So with yeah, with big data, like, you know, we have, you know, data shader is really great at just taking whatever you throw at it. But, you know, I still think it's very important to think about the, you know, manual aggregation exercises that we went through. And in particular, also you could combine that with, you know, sort of the different ways of, like what we were talking about in the previous slide about, you know, how you want to design, you know, thinking more about how you want to design your visualization if it's a bit more static. So if, you know, if you have some sort of aggregation, but you want to, you know, highlight outliers, which is usually, you know, something that would probably be very important with kind of a larger data set. You're looking for anomalies, things like that. So what matters isn't just the aggregation, but what matters is what's not fitting, you know, sort of highlighting out of a very large data set, you know, what things you want to focus on. So again, kind of something a theme we've gone over in the class, and something that, you know, could hopefully help with as you guys are working through your final projects. And this I just added because this has been kind of another common theme I've seen out there with data visualization. The kind of, you know, trying to really, you know, sort of get AI a bit more involved. So you'll see a lot, like I think Excel does it. I know Google Sheets do it, where you know, you'll sort of have recommended graphs based on the shape of the data. I've come across examples where where sort of tools that are trying to kind of go more towards natural language processing, you know, being able to, you know, not just kind of put together the analysis yourself, but to almost ask questions in a conversational way and get visualization as you know, as a result of that. And it's something that, in my opinion, I think it's a bit overrated. I mean, and it's very embryonic, so I'm almost thinking of like what kind of people are seeing as you know, the future of this sort of, you know, of this sort of analysis. It's like, I don't see it as, you know, clear cut as, you know, you're typing with a chatbot and a chatbot magically comes up with, you know, a dashboard for you. But, you know, obviously, things are going to be a bit more, in my opinion, you know, I could sort of see things being more narrowly focused. You know, so being able to, um, you know, sort of, if there is something that's repeated, you know, if there is something that, you know, things like obviously, you know, other data science tasks you're able to, you know, really sort of work out in this way. But, you know, I think there's always going to be a bit of a gap. Like there won't sort of be, you know, the magic creation of a dashboard when you're just simply asking questions or throwing data at at some sort of algorithm. And then the last couple of last few things here. The like this diagram, it's everywhere really, and this is sort of touching on something I mentioned earlier, where kind of data science really emerged as sort of the goal being trying to combine all of these different skills. What and as the field is maturing, there's I found that there's become less and less focus on trying to combine everything, and more of a focus on really blurring the lines between all of these fields. So trying to so you'll see characterizations like I've seen characterizations of a T sort of shaped expertise, where you have where there's an expertise in kind of in one of these subfields or something like that, but there's sort of just an understanding of an overall context. And as I'll get into in a bit, things like here it's called hacking skills, computer science, engineering, that's becoming way less, the domain of like sort of traditional computer science, and it's becoming kind of, more, very much more related to other fields. And, so something like that, it's less, there's always going to be specialty. It's impossible to know everything, but there's, going to be sort of more blurring of a lot of these lines. And I bring this up because at Plotly, we actually recently had Fernando Perez, the creator of Jupyter Notebooks, who also is a professor at UC Berkeley. And he was mentioning this new, sort of courses that he's working on. And this is, right now, sort of, I think he even mentioned this is a required course, but I don't know if it's one of those, core requirements where you could choose some, sort of choose 10 out of 20 or something like that. But this is, you can see here, this is their intro data science, foundations of data science class. Kind of see in the screenshot there, there's that's a Jupyter notebook that they're teaching from. The students are all using Jupyter notebooks. And this is a course that's designed for all entry level students. So lit majors are, lit majors, like anyone who's in the school is, really prepare. They're trying to prepare this course for as broad an audience as possible. And this is kind of I see as related to what I mentioned before, the kind of blurring of these, the blurring of these lines between these different specialties. You have, people who are using, you don't have to be a computer science major to use, to be able to use Python. You wouldn't sort of be a full-fledged stack developer, but it's, at least using Python within a Jupyter context is something that is, going to really, become as common as things like, we think of as Excel now. And I've seen this happen in a few, I've seen it happen in more specialized domains, like at a previous company I worked for, IHS. You would have tools for doing econometrics, which is basically data science before there was a name for data science. And it's a lot of, sort of specialty tools. They come with, usually command lines that you're able to, interact with the code. And I've worked with people who are using these, and, they like, there's still kind of a barrier to, using something like R or Python. So that barrier is slowly going to go away, and there's going to be more people using tools like this. So, this is something to, keep in mind as you're continuing your degree here is, being a data science degree, you shouldn't just be aiming to, kind of know Jupyter, know RStudio, and I've sort of tried to do my part in bringing in, more context, trying to sort of see how these tools that you're using do fit into kind of a larger engineering context, and sort of bringing in more kind of data engineering and web development concepts. So I think kind of having that context will kind of help differentiate you from the lit majors who know Jupyter. Um, and that's pretty much it I had for content. So and not next week, in 2 weeks, come ready to present your final projects. And as I mentioned earlier, the final projects you should aim to pretty much be done, and be ready to kind of show off what you've had. So it should be a fairly complete final project. I didn't mean to, yeah, Dan. I didn't mean to dump on lit majors in that way, but just wanted to. I just found that really interesting that that a lot, that Jupyter is sort of being used in such a general, sort of in the Berkeley core curriculum like that. So with the rest of the time, does anyone have any other questions? Like I would like to have some Q&A. Oh, and yeah, Chinmay, thank you for your question. Reminded me of something else. So to first answer your question, the presentations, it's there are a lot of people, so we'll be so I'll want to try to keep it at 5 to 10 minutes per presentation. It's and I'll usually unfortunately, a lot of these, as I'm sure everyone here, this isn't your first class with this program. The final projects can sometimes go pretty long, so I'll try to keep things as clipped as possible. So just keep that in mind if your presentation starts to go a bit long. And what um, what I'll do is I'm debating whether, and actually I'll ask, I'll pose this to everyone here. I I'm debating whether or not I want to have kind of signing up for blocks so that people know when they're coming in, or if it should just be more of a usually what I've done in the past is just have students kind of almost call out their order in the chat, and we've gotten through all of them in that way. Is there any preference that anyone has here? Yeah, yeah. The blocks will be more organized, and also because we do have 2 sections this semester, it's never. I mean, despite all the planning we do, it's not going to be as clean as having, 1 section finish and then have the next hour be devoted to the other section. So I'll try to divide up sort of the full 2 hours of the meetups. And also, we had lots of students who went back and forth between sections. So I'll yeah, Chinmay, that's pretty much what I'm thinking of doing. I'll create a shared spreadsheet, and I'll post that in both of the sections, and everyone could sign up for their Doodle. Yeah, Kelly mentioned Doodle. I haven't used that. I'll check that out. But worst comes to worst, I'll just use Google Sheets for that. And the and then we at least have kind of things to aim for, because another This didn't end up happening last semester. Last semester was the first time I had two sections, and we ended up, like a few students left early on, a few students had to join later, and we're in a similar situation um, with these two sections where there's a limit to GoToMeeting, so that's why we've divided things up into two sections. And and I'm just mentioning this like on the off chance that we happen to reach the cap and people aren't able to get on. If that happens, I'll find a way to sort of have people contact me pretty much immediately, and we'll sort of try to stagger things a bit. Yeah, it's so yeah, it will be more of an issue for the later set. So actually, what I'll do is I'll leave the Google Sheet like open to both sections. Oh, and yeah, Natalie, good question the about recording presentations. That's that's absolutely possible. And so if you are able to send it before the 19th, and or if there's if there's something preventing you from being able to make it on the 19th, you could record your presentation and email that to me, and that'll help with sort of like that's pretty much why with the last semester we had no issues with reaching the cap. So if a few students want to do that, that's definitely not a problem at all. Um, yeah, Kelly. So Kelly asked the what is the process for gathering feedback from classmates? It's I would recommend just checking the chat as as not as you're presenting, but after you've had time to present, and usually I try to incorporate all of that all of that with my feedback, but definitely take some time after you've completed to after you've completed your presentation just to check that out. And there's no real process aside from that. And then Sarah, um, what if we record? I actually haven't looked into this. GoToMeeting does something with chats, but I'm not sure what. Like I've seen something about saving chats, so I'll see if I'll try to see if there's a way that I could save those and distribute them after everyone's presented. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Kelly, you're asking about recording presentations. With that, the what I'll do is I'll basically like after the meetup, I'll post all of the presentations in an announcement, or yeah, I didn't end up doing something like this last semester. But what could work is I could set up another discussion board, perhaps, and what could happen is everyone could those of you who are submitting your presentations, in addition to emailing me, just create a post in this new discussion board, and we could use that to solicit feedback. And that would be a great way to kind of have everyone see everyone's presentation as well. Cool. And then Sarah asked if the goal of the presentation is to if the goal is to describe the process, the data, the visualization, what you learned regarding the data. It's so I would say in terms of the presentation, keep it a bit more towards like I don't just like the presentation shouldn't just be sort of how sort of how technically you arrived at your project. It should be it should be more geared towards what kind of what you found out from your data, what kind of more contextual in that way. And really like think of it in terms of the like really the purpose of the sort of data visualization is to sort of have that like communication, so make it about if there's kind of some thesis of you wanted to sort of make a particular point, you're trying to drive that particular point with your visualization, the presentation should also be in service of that. Of course, if there are interesting stories about how about sort of the technique that you used and you feel you have time, feel free to include that. But I would say sort of focus more on on sort of essentially the story you're telling with the data. Cool. Anyone else have any other questions? Cool. So if that's it for questions, I'll end things a bit early here. And I think I have to keep this open for the next session because it takes too long to process the video. So I'll leave this open for now, but yeah, so good luck everyone with your final projects. Definitely reach out if you have any questions as the next 2 weeks progress, and looking forward to seeing what everyone comes up with in 2 weeks. All right, thanks a lot, everyone.